I found out I didn't have a seat at my own brother's wedding while I was already standing in the reception hall, in my dress, holding a card with my name on it, watching a stranger's shoulder brush past me because there was nowhere for me to actually sit down. I want to back up, though, because you need to understand the small, quiet history behind that single moment, so you understand exactly how much weight it was carrying by the time it finally happened. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is that I was the older sister. The one who helped raise my brother more than most sisters ever have to, because our parents worked long, exhausting hours when we were kids, and someone had to make sure homework got done and dinner got eaten and nightmares got talked through at 2 in the morning. I wasn't his mother. But for years, I was something close to it, and I never resented that role. I loved him the way you only love someone you've had a hand in shaping. My brother Adam and I were close our entire lives, or at least I believed we were, right up until the year he met Christine. Christine wasn't a bad person, not exactly, and I want to be fair to her in this story, because it would be easy to make her the villain and let everyone else off the hook. But from the very beginning, there was something about the way she related to our family that felt like she was slowly redrawing the boundaries of who counted as important and who didn't, and doing it so gradually that no one quite noticed until the redrawing was already finished. Adam and Christine dated for 3 years before he proposed. I remember the night he called me, giddy with excitement, to tell me he was going to ask her. He asked me, specifically, if I'd help him pick out the ring, because he trusted my taste more than anyone else's. We spent an entire Saturday afternoon at 3 different jewelers, and I remember feeling so proud, like I was still exactly as essential to his life as I'd always been. The proposal happened over a weekend trip to the coast, and by all accounts it was beautiful. Christine said yes, obviously. My parents were thrilled. I was thrilled. For a little while, everything about that engagement felt like the natural, happy continuation of a family that had always been close, whatever its ordinary imperfections. Here is where I need to explain the family dynamics that shaped everything that came after, because none of what happened at that wedding came from nowhere. My parents had always had a particular soft spot for Adam, the kind of soft spot that's common with the only son in families like ours. It wasn't that they loved me less, not in any way they would have admitted or even consciously recognized. But there was a deference toward Adam's preferences, an eagerness to please him, that I'd noticed my entire life without ever naming it directly. When Adam wanted something, the household organized around getting it for him. When I wanted something, I usually got a version of it, adjusted for practicality, a compromise dressed up as a decision. Once Christine entered the picture, that existing deference toward Adam seemed to transfer, almost seamlessly, onto her. My mother in particular became fixated on Christine's approval in a way that started to feel less like normal in-law diplomacy and more like a hierarchy being quietly established, one where Christine's comfort mattered more than mine. Simply because Christine represented Adam's future and I, apparently, no longer represented anything quite as urgent. Wedding planning began about a year before the ceremony, and this is where the first real cracks started to show, though I mostly didn't notice them as cracks at the time. I offered to help plan things, the way I always had for every family event, and my mother thanked me but told me Christine's mother and Christine had a system already worked out. Fine, I told myself. Not every family does things the way ours always had. But then invitations started going out, and I noticed, almost by accident, that a cousin I barely spoke to had been assigned as a bridesmaid, while I, the sister who had practically co-raised the groom, had not been asked to stand up at all. When I brought it up gently to my mother, she said it was Christine's choice and that I shouldn't take it personally, since Christine wanted to keep the bridal party limited to people she was personally close with. I told myself that made sense. Weddings belong to the bride, after all. I told myself a lot of things that year that I now recognize as quiet talking myself down from feelings I didn't yet have the courage to sit with honestly. The first real red flag came about 4 months before the wedding. I asked my mother, casually, over the phone, what the seating arrangement looked like for the reception, mostly out of curiosity about who I'd be sitting with. There was a strange pause on the line, longer than the question warranted, before she said, "Oh, we haven't finalized all of that yet. Don't worry about it. Growing distance followed that same pattern over the following weeks. My mother, who used to call me constantly for wedding updates, started looping me out of conversations she used to include me in automatically. I'd hear about decisions secondhand, through Adam, days or sometimes weeks after they'd already been made. When I asked about it, the answer was always some version of, "It's just been so busy. There's so much going on," which might have been true, except busy people usually still make room for the people who matter to them. I was starting to understand, slowly, painfully, that I might not be counted among those people anymore, at least not in the way I'd always assumed. Suspicious behavior escalated about 6 weeks out. I overheard my father, on speakerphone with my mother while I was visiting for a Sunday dinner, discussing table assignments for the reception. I heard my own name mentioned, followed immediately by a long pause and my mother saying, "We'll figure that out," in a tone that made my stomach drop in a way I couldn't yet explain. I didn't say anything that night. I told myself I was imagining problems that didn't exist. I told myself this a lot in those final weeks because the alternative, actually confronting what was happening, felt too enormous to face head-on. The wedding day itself started out fine, at least on the surface. I arrived early, in the dress I'd bought specifically for the occasion, hair and makeup done, genuinely excited to watch my brother get married. The ceremony was beautiful. I cried during his vows, the way you do when you've watched someone grow from a child into the person standing at that altar. For those 45 minutes, everything felt exactly the way a wedding should feel. The discovery happened during the transition to the reception hall. Guests were being directed, in small clusters, to enter and find their assigned tables, each one guided by a small printed card with their name and table number, handed out by one of the bridal party members stationed near the entrance. I found my card easily enough, my name, printed clearly, no table number listed at all. Just my name, and a blank space where a number should have been. I assumed it was a printing error, the kind of small logistical mistake that happens at every large event. I walked up to the coordinator's table near the entrance and explained the issue, expecting a quick correction. The young woman working the table checked her list, checked it again, frowned, and told me there simply wasn't a table assignment on file for my name at all. She suggested, kindly enough, that I check with the family to see if there'd been a last-minute change. I want to describe what that particular kind of confusion feels like, standing in a reception hall in your wedding-appropriate dress, holding a name card with no number on it, while roughly 150 other guests filter past you toward tables that all apparently exist for them, but not, somehow, for you. It isn't quite panic yet. It's something closer to a slow, creeping disbelief, the kind that makes you double-check the obvious, reread the card 3 or 4 times, as if the number might simply appear if you look hard enough. My emotional reaction built slowly rather than exploding all at once. I remember standing near the edge of the room, scanning the seating chart posted on an easel by the entrance, a beautifully calligraphed chart with every guest's name assigned neatly to a table. Except when I finally located the section where my name should have logically appeared, alphabetically, between 2 cousins I recognized, there was simply nothing there. My name wasn't listed anywhere on that chart at all. Not misplaced. Not attached to the wrong table. Simply absent, as if the person creating the chart had either forgotten I existed or deliberately chosen not to include me. I started searching for answers immediately, moving through the crowd toward my parents, who I found near the head table, already seated, already sipping champagne, already deep in conversation with Christine's parents. My mother's face, when I approached and quietly explained the situation, went through a fast, complicated sequence of expressions, surprise, then something that looked almost like guilt, quickly smoothed over into practiced reassurance. "I'm sure it's just a mix-up," she said. "Let me find the coordinator." But the explanations that followed over the next 20 minutes conflicted with each other in ways that made it impossible to believe any single one of them. First, my mother told me the seating chart had been finalized by the venue's coordinator, not by her, and that any error must have happened on their end. Then, when I found the actual coordinator, and she confirmed that the chart had been built entirely from a list my mother's family had submitted weeks earlier, my mother shifted explanations again, saying there had been so many last-minute changes that something must have simply slipped through the cracks. Then, when I pressed further, asking specifically who had been responsible for finalizing the guest list, she said, quietly, that Christine's mother had done the final pass on numbers to save space, since the venue had a strict capacity limit. Digging for the truth meant, in this case, pulling my brother aside during the cocktail hour, which felt like an enormous imposition on what was supposed to be the happiest day of his life, but I didn't know what else to do. Adam looked genuinely confused when I explained what had happened, and for a moment I believed his confusion was real, that he had no idea any of this had occurred. But then something shifted in his expression, a flicker of recognition, quickly suppressed, and I realized, with a sinking feeling, that some part of him already knew something about this that he hadn't yet told me. He admitted, reluctantly, pulled aside near the coat check where the noise of the reception couldn't quite reach us, that there had been a conversation about the guest count weeks earlier, when the venue's final numbers came in slightly over capacity. Someone had needed to be cut, or at least deprioritized in the seating arrangement, to make the numbers work without expensive last-minute venue changes. He said he didn't know exactly how that conversation had gone, only that it had happened, and that our mother had assured him everything would be handled. Hidden secrets started revealing themselves after that, in the particular way that one admission tends to loosen several others. Christine's sister, whom I barely knew, mentioned offhand during the reception, not realizing the significance of what she was saying, that there had been a whole discussion at the final planning meeting about which of the extended family members could be moved to a hypothetical overflow list if the numbers didn't work out, and that my name had specifically come up in that conversation, because I wasn't in the wedding party and therefore, in the logic of that meeting, was considered slightly less essential to accommodate than people who were. I felt something rising in my chest at that point that I can only describe as a very specific, very quiet kind of devastation. Not because being cut from a numbers-constrained guest list is, in the abstract, some unforgivable sin. People make hard choices about venue capacity all the time. What devastated me was the fact that no one had told me. That my own parents had sat in a meeting where my name was raised as a candidate for exclusion, and rather than calling me, telling me honestly what was happening, giving me the dignity of knowing in advance, they had simply let me find out by standing alone in a reception hall holding a blank card. The rising emotional conflict inside me built through the rest of that cocktail hour, even as I tried to hold myself together for Adam's sake, even as I smiled for photos and made small talk with relatives who had no idea anything was wrong. Underneath all of it, a single question kept circling. If I mattered as much as I'd always assumed, wouldn't someone have simply told me the truth, instead of letting me discover my own erasure in real time, in public, on the one day it would hurt the most? I made the decision to confront my mother directly rather than let the evening dissolve into forced politeness. I found her near the edge of the dance floor, away from the noise, and I asked her plainly whether she had known, in advance, that I wouldn't have an assigned seat. She admitted it, finally, without the shifting explanations from earlier. Yes, she said. There had been a conversation. Yes, my name had come up as someone who could be moved to a standing overflow area near the bar if the final numbers required it. And yes, she had agreed to that arrangement rather than raise any objection on my behalf, because she hadn't wanted to cause tension with Christine's family so close to the wedding. The public confrontation, when it happened, wasn't loud. I want to be honest about that, because there's a temptation in stories like this to imagine a dramatic scene, glasses shattering, raised voices echoing across a silent room. That isn't what happened. I simply asked her, standing close enough that only she could hear me clearly, whether it had ever occurred to her that being honest with me in advance would have hurt far less than what actually happened. She didn't have an answer for that. Not a good one, anyway. The major twist arrived a few minutes later, when Christine herself approached us, having noticed the tension in our body language even from across the room. She asked, gently, what was wrong, and when my mother hesitated, Christine pressed further until the truth came out in front of her as well. And here's the part that genuinely surprised me. Christine looked as shocked as I felt. She told us, plainly, that she had never actually asked for me to be cut from the seating chart at all. The overflow list decision, the one my mother had attributed partly to Christine's mother, saving space, had in fact been my own mother's suggestion during that planning meeting, offered up so quickly and so casually that Christine's mother had simply gone along with it, assuming it must have already been discussed with me. The full truth, once it finally emerged in that quiet corner of the reception hall, was this. Faced with a venue capacity problem, my mother had volunteered my name for exclusion before anyone else's, without consulting me, without even mentioning it to Adam beforehand in any detail, because in the moment, under pressure, she had defaulted to the same old pattern that had shaped our entire family dynamic, the assumption that I, the easy one, the reliable one, the one who never made a fuss, would simply absorb whatever inconvenience arose without complaint, so that the actual important guests could be preserved without friction. The emotional showdown that followed wasn't dramatic in the way movies portray these things, but it was real, and it was raw. My mother cried, finally, admitting that she hadn't thought through what it would actually feel like from my side of things, that in the moment she had simply been trying to solve a logistics problem as quickly and quietly as possible. I told her, through tears of my own by that point, that solving a logistics problem by quietly erasing your own daughter's presence at her brother's wedding wasn't a small oversight. It was a reflection of exactly how much consideration she believed I required, compared to everyone else in that room. The consequences of that conversation didn't play out all at once. Adam, once he understood the full scope of what had happened, was visibly shaken, caught between anger at our mother and the impossible position of still needing to be present for his own wedding day. He arranged, quietly, for a chair to be brought to the head table area for me, an improvised solution that solved the immediate, visible problem but did nothing, of course, to undo what the moment had already revealed. Karma, if you want to call it that, arrived in smaller, quieter forms over the following weeks. Relatives who had witnessed pieces of the tension began asking questions among themselves, the way families always do, and the story of what had happened spread in fragments through calls and texts, each version slightly different, but the core of it consistent. I had been deliberately deprioritized, and my mother had known about it in advance and said nothing. My mother found herself, for the first time in longer than I could remember, on the receiving end of the kind of quiet family judgment she had always been so careful to direct only at others. Walking away from that day didn't mean cutting my family off entirely, the way people sometimes expect when they hear a story like this. What it meant, in practice, was something quieter and more permanent. I stopped assuming that my own comfort was the flexible variable in every family equation. I stopped volunteering myself, silently, for the role of the person who absorbs inconvenience so others don't have to. I started asking directly, plainly, uncomfortably, for the things I actually wanted, rather than waiting to see whether anyone would think to offer them. Personal growth, in the months that followed, looked less like a single dramatic transformation and more like a long series of small, deliberate corrections. I started speaking up sooner, before resentment had the chance to build silently underneath politeness. I started trusting my own instincts about the moments when something felt off, rather than talking myself back down from them the way I had for years leading up to that wedding. The new beginning came slowly, through a series of more honest conversations with my mother over the following year, conversations that were often uncomfortable, sometimes tense, but always more honest than anything we'd managed before. She never fully understood, I think, the depth of what that day had cost me emotionally, but she did, eventually, begin to catch herself in the small moments when the old pattern threatened to repeat itself. Checking in with me directly instead of assuming my silence meant my consent. My relationship with Adam actually grew stronger in the aftermath, strangely enough. He made a point, in the years since, of being far more deliberate about including me, not out of guilt, exactly, but out of a genuine recognition that he'd nearly lost sight of how much I mattered to him. buried under the ordinary chaos of wedding planning and his own excitement about his new life with Christine. Christine and I, too, built a real friendship out of that shared moment of clarity, one that might never have existed if the truth hadn't come out in that corner of the reception hall. My emotional reflection on all of this, looking back now, is that I spent most of my life mistaking my own quiet accommodation for a kind of strength. I thought that never asking for more, never questioning an oversight, never making anyone uncomfortable by naming a hurt out loud, was simply what a good sister looked like. I don't believe that anymore. I think now that real love, the kind worth having, doesn't require you to disappear quietly into the background so that everyone else's comfort can be preserved. The final life lesson I carry from that day is this: being the reliable one, the flexible one, the one who never complains, doesn't protect you from being overlooked. Sometimes it does the opposite. Sometimes the people who love you learn, slowly, over years of your own silence, that you are simply the easiest person in the room to set aside when something has to give. So if you've ever stood somewhere, holding a card with your name on it and nothing else, wondering how you became the variable someone else decided was expendable, I need you to hear this clearly. You were not overreacting. You were not causing unnecessary drama by noticing what had happened to you. You were simply seeing, perhaps for the first time, a pattern that had been quietly shaping your place in that family long before you ever had the words to describe it out loud. And if this story felt familiar to you in any way, if some small detail of it landed somewhere close to home, there's more to tell. Because that wedding wasn't the only time my family quietly decided my comfort mattered less than someone else's convenience, and it wasn't the last time I had to learn that lesson the hard way. There's another story, one about what happened the following year at my own father's retirement dinner, that I haven't told publicly until now. If you want to hear it, that's the next video. I promise you, it's worth staying for.